The full moon is blazing. The entire pack is watching. The Alpha King, the one every woman was taught to dream of, extends his hand and waits for you to become his Luna, his queen, his forever. And right there, in front of thousands, you look straight into those golden eyes and speak 4 words that stop the world. I will not be your mate. What kind of woman has the courage to shatter a sacred mate bond in public? What kind of kingdom forces her to choose between love and freedom? And what happens the second those words leave her lips? When one no becomes the spark that sets an ocean of silenced women roaring back to life. If you've ever swallowed your truth to keep the peace, if you've ever felt your worth measured by how quietly you serve, if the idea of finally saying enough out loud makes your heart race and your hands shake, then don't move, because this isn't just another werewolf romance. This is the moment a rejected Luna turns destiny inside out and drags an entire kingdom into the light with her. Press play. Hear her say it. Feel what happens next. You won't look away. Chapter 1. Shadows of Stone. The kingdom of Valthorn had stood for 300 years, beneath the same unyielding rules, carved deeper than the runes on its black granite walls. Moonlight never fully penetrated the narrow streets. It only silvered the edges of things, making the shadows thicker. In the lower quarters, where the air tasted of damp stone and lye soap, women moved like ghosts with calloused hands. Jessica had learned early that silence was survival. At 16, she still carried the wide-eyed wonder of a child who hadn't yet accepted defeat. Her mother, Ilara, had tried to teach her otherwise. Ilara's back was curved from decades of bending, scrubbing marble until it gleamed, hauling water up endless stairs, birthing 3 children only to watch 2 sons grow into men who would never look back at her with gratitude. The 3rd child, Jessica, was the quiet rebellion Ilara had never dared voice. One humid evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Jessica knelt beside her mother in their single-room dwelling. The oil lamp flickered, throwing long shadows across the packed earth floor. Jessica's fingers traced the fresh bruises on Ilara's wrists, marks from the overseer's grip when a jar had slipped. Why did they get to choose? Jessica whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. The boys run the halls. They feast. They decide. We just serve. Ilara paused, cloth in hand. Her eyes, once bright hazel, now dulled, filled slowly. She set the rag aside and pulled Jessica against her chest. The scent of soap and exhaustion wrapped around them both. Because long ago, Ilara began, voice barely above the lamp's hiss, the first Alpha declared our voices too gentle for command. Too tempting. The moon goddess, they said, made us vessels, not rulers. So the laws were written in blood. Women speak only when spoken to. We carry, we clean, we birth, we bow. And if we forget. She touched the faint scar along her collarbone. We remember. Jessica's throat tightened. She felt something hot and unfamiliar uncoil in her chest. Anger. Yes, but laced with a deeper ache. A promise. That night she lay awake on the thin pallet, staring at cracks in the ceiling that looked like lightning frozen in stone. The mate bond was legend here, sacred, unbreakable, a golden thread spun by the goddess herself. Yet even that gift had been twisted. Alphas chose Lunas from the silent ones, the obedient ones. The bond was supposed to be love. Instead, it became another chain. Jessica pressed her palm to her heart. If the goddess gave me a voice, she thought, why do they keep trying to take it? 3 days later, the ritual came again. Every 3rd dawn, the women of the lower quarters marched to the palace. Fountains to fill the great clay, jars that fed the upper halls. Jessica walked in the middle of the line, head lowered as custom demanded. But her shoulders refused to slump. The sun rose behind her, catching the copper threads in her dark braids, turning them to fire. From the high balcony, King Darius watched. He was 32 winters old, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with eyes the color of molten gold, wolf eyes that missed nothing. His presence commanded silence even from the wind. Warriors bowed, elders deferred. Yet lately the moon's pull had grown restless in his blood. The mate scent had finally sharpened, calling him to the one destined to stand beside him. His gaze snagged on her. She moved differently. Not cowed, not broken. The jar balanced on her shoulder like a crown she hadn't yet claimed. When she bent to fill it, the line of her neck arched proud and graceful. Heat surged through him, possessive, primal, undeniable. He lifted a hand. "That one," he said to his beta, voice low, final. "Bring her to the eastern chamber tonight." Word reached Alara by midday. Her hands shook as she gripped Jessica's arms in the dim kitchen. "The king has seen you," she breathed. "He demands you tonight. Jessica, this could be your chance. One night in his favor. And perhaps things change for us." Jessica stared at the wall. Her pulse thundered. Refusal meant lashes. Acceptance meant surrendering the only part of herself she still owned. But beneath the fear, a spark flared. "Or I will go," she said quietly. "But not for the reason he thinks, Mo." That night the eastern chamber smelled of cedar smoke and myrrh. Torches hissed along the walls. Darius waited, shirt unlaced at the throat, the hard planes of his chest rising and falling with restrained hunger. When Jessica entered, barefoot, simple linen shift clinging to her sweat-damp skin, he felt the mate bond snap taut like a bowstring. She stopped 3 paces away, didn't curtsy, didn't lower her eyes. "You are exquisiter," he murmured, stepping closer. His voice was velvet over steel. "The goddess has been generous." Jessica lifted her chin. "The goddess gave me more than beauty, my lord." He paused. A slow, dangerous smile curved his mouth. "Bold. I like bold das." His fingers brushed her cheek. Heat bloomed under his touch. The bond pulsed, warm, intoxicating, promising nights of tangled limbs and whispered claims. But Jessica stepped back. "I will not be claimed tonight," she said. "Not until you understand what claiming me truly means." His eyes narrowed. Desire warred with surprise. "Explain." She met his stare unflinching. "The women of Valthorn are not shadows. We are fire kept banked too long. If you want me as your Luna, if you want this bond to burn instead of bind, then free us, all of us. Give us voice. Give us choice. Rewrite the laws that choke us." Silence stretched, thick and electric. Darius laughed once, low, disbelieving. "You bargain with me, in my own chamber?" "I bargain with the man the goddess chose for me," she countered. "Because if you cannot see me as equal, you do not deserve me at all." He closed the distance in one stride. His hand cupped her jaw, thumb tracing her lower lip. The air crackled. She felt his heartbeat through the thin space between them, fast, hungry. His scent enveloped her, pine, smoke, alpha musk. Her own body betrayed her with a shiver of want she hated and craved in equal measure. "You tempt fate," he growled softly, mouth inches from hers, "and you tempt me." "Then choose," she whispered. "Me, or the kingdom you inherited on the backs of silenced women." He searched her eyes. For one heartbeat, something raw flickered there, conflict, desire, perhaps even respect. Then he released her, stepped back. "Tomorrow is the ceremony," he said, voice rough. "The entire pack will witness our binding. Think carefully, little fire. Once the words are spoken before the moon, there is no undoing them." Jessica smiled, small, sad, fierce. "I already have." She turned and walked out, leaving him in the torchlight, chest heaving, the bond thrumming with unfinished heat. Outside, the night air kissed her flushed skin. Her knees trembled, tears stung. But she lifted her face to the moon and let one defiant drop fall. Tomorrow she would stand before them all, and she would choose herself. Chapter 2. The Circle of Moonlight. The palace courtyard had never felt so vast, so suffocating. Thousands of eyes pressed against Jessica like a physical weight as she crossed the wide flagstones toward the raised marble circle at the center. Torches snapped in the night wind, casting long, restless shadows that danced across faces, some curious, some furious, most simply stunned into silence. The air smelled of cedar smoke, night-blooming jasmine, and the sharp metallic tang of anticipation. Drums had stopped the moment she appeared at the arched gateway. Now only the low murmur of the crowd filled the space, rising and falling like distant thunder. Jessica's bare feet met cold stone. Each step sent a shiver up her spine, but she refused to let it show. She wore the ceremonial gown they had forced upon her that afternoon, deep midnight blue silk that clung and flowed in equal measure, embroidered at the hem with silver crescent moons. It was beautiful. It was also a cage disguised as elegance, sleeves long enough to hide the bruises from yesterday's training lash, bodice tight enough to remind her of every breath she was allowed. She climbed the 3 shallow steps to the circle. Darius already stood there. He had changed since last night. The open shirt was gone. Now he wore the full regalia of the Alpha King. Black velvet tunic edged in gold thread, wolf pelt cloak clasped at the shoulder with an onyx brooch shaped like a snarling head, leather bracers etched with ancient runes. His dark hair was swept back, still damp from the ritual bath. Those molten gold eyes locked on her the instant she appeared, and the mate bond, still alive, still aching, gave one vicious tug deep in her chest. It hurt, not the sharp, tearing pain of severance yet, but the slow, burning pull of something unfinished, like a hand reaching for hers across an abyss and finding only air. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply watched her approach, jaw set, shoulders rigid, every line of him radiating the coiled tension of a predator who has scented prey and discovered it carries teeth. Jessica stopped 3 paces away, close enough that she could see the faint scar running along his left cheekbone, the way his chest rose and fell just a fraction too quickly, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him despite the cool night. The High Elder stepped forward, staff striking marble once. The sound cracked like a whip. "By the will of the moon goddess," the old man intoned, voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard. "We gather to witness the binding of Alpha King Darius Veyron and his destined mate, Jessica of the lower quarter. The thread has been spun. The scent has been claimed. Tonight the bond is sealed before pack and moon." A ripple of murmurs, some approving, some uneasy. Darius extended his right hand, palm up. The gesture was both command and plea. His fingers were steady, but Jessica saw the smallest tremor at the tips, the only crack in his iron composure. She looked at that open hand. Memories flashed unbidden. Last night in the eastern chamber, the way those same fingers had brushed her cheek, the way her traitorous skin had warmed under his touch, the way her pulse had leaped even as her mind screamed to run. She remembered the velvet rasp of his voice saying exquisite, remembered the electric promise in his nearness, the way the bond had sung between them like a taut string about to snap into music. She remembered stepping back. Now that same hand waited again. The crowd held its breath. Jessica lifted her gaze to his. For one heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the 2 of them. No drums, no elders, no laws carved in blood, just a man and a woman standing on opposite sides of an invisible line drawn by centuries. His eyes burned with something raw, pride, hunger, confusion, and beneath it all, a flicker of fear she had never seen in him before. Fear that she would walk away, fear that she already had. Her own heart answered with a painful thud, because part of her, small, secret, traitorous, still felt the pull. Still wondered what it would be like to step forward, to place her hand in his, to let the bond flare bright and complete, to be wanted so fiercely by the most powerful man in Valthorn that the kingdom itself would bend around them. But the rest of her remembered the women who had walked beside her to the fountains that morning, heads bowed, backs bent, futures already decided. Remembered her mother's scar. Remembered the promise she had whispered to the stars. She drew one slow, steady breath. Then she spoke, voice clear, carrying farther than any shout. "If you want me to stand beside you as Luna, if you want this bond to be more than chains disguised as fate, then prove it." A hush deeper than silence fell. "Free them," she said. Every woman in this kingdom, free our voices, free our choices, free our lives, rewrite the laws that were never ours to write. Do that, and I will consider placing my hand in yours." The words landed like stones in still water. Gasps erupted, elders hissed, warriors shifted, hands twitching toward sword hilts. Darius's hand remained outstretched, but now it trembled visibly. His voice, when it came, was low, rough, meant for her alone, yet heard by all. "You ask the impossible." "No," Jessica answered softly. "I ask the necessary." For a long moment, neither moved. The moon rode high above them, cold and impartial, washing the entire courtyard in silver light. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman let out a single, choked sob, hope and terror braided together. Darius's gaze never left Jessica's face. Something flickered there. Anger, admiration, grief, desire, all at once. His fingers curled slowly inward, not in surrender, but in restraint. "I cannot break 300 years of law for one woman," he said. The words sounded as if they cost him. "Then you cannot have me," she replied. The bond between them pulsed once, bright, agonizing, beautiful, and then began to fray at the edges. Jessica felt it like a thread unraveling inside her ribcage. Pain bloomed sharp and sudden. Tears stung the backs of her eyes. But she did not flinch. She did not beg. Instead, she lifted her chin higher. And in that single motion, proud, unbroken, blazing, the first cracks appeared in the ancient order of Valthorn. Darius's hand dropped to his side. The High Elder raised his staff again, voice shaking. "The ceremony cannot proceed under such—" But Jessica was already turning. She stepped down from the circle, slow, deliberate, every movement carrying the weight of decision. Behind her, the crowd stirred. A single woman near the front, older gray streaked through her braid, took one hesitant step forward. Then another. Then three. Then more. Bare feet whispered against stone. Jessica did not look back. But she felt them. Felt the first fragile wave of sisters rising behind her, hearts pounding in rhythm with her own. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the ache of a bond beginning to tear, a small, fierce spark of joy flickered to life. She had not won yet, but she had begun. Chapter 3. Words That Shatter. Jessica's final step off the marble circle rang soft against the stone, but it landed like thunder in every listening heart. She did not run. She walked, head high, shoulders square. The midnight blue silk of her gown rippled behind her like spilled night, catching torchlight in silver threads. Each footfall was measured, deliberate, the way a queen might leave a throne she had never wanted to sit upon. Behind her, the silence stretched thin and brittle, then cracked. A single sob escaped from somewhere in the front ranks, raw, involuntary, the sound of a woman who had held her breath for decades. Another followed, then a third, not loud, not defiant yet, just released. Jessica felt them more than heard them. She kept her eyes forward, fixed on the great arched gateway that led out of the courtyard and into the winding streets of the lower quarters. Moonlight poured through the opening like liquid silver, beckoning. Her chest ached with every beat, sharp, tearing, as though invisible claws were slowly peeling the golden thread of the mate bond away from her ribs, one fiber at a time. The pain was exquisite. Not the clean slice of a blade, but something deeper, the slow unraveling of a promise she had never fully made. Every step forward pulled another strand loose. She could almost hear it, faint, musical, heartbreaking, like harp strings snapping in a quiet room. She did not look back at Darius. She did not need to. She could feel his gaze burning between her shoulder blades, hot and heavy, a weight that made her want to falter and stand taller all at once. She could sense the exact moment his composure fractured, the sudden hitch in his breathing, the low, involuntary growl that rumbled through his chest and rolled across the courtyard like distant thunder. The sound vibrated in her bones. He moved, one stride then another. The crowd parted instinctively before him. warriors dropping to one knee, elders clutching their robes, but he did not acknowledge them. His focus was singular, predatory, locked on the woman who had just refused him in front of every soul he ruled. Jessica reached the bottom step. Darius closed the distance in 3 long strides. His hand shot out and caught her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to stop her. Skin met skin. The contact was lightning. For one suspended heartbeat, the fraying bond flared back to violent life, bright, searing, alive. Heat surged up her arm, flooded her chest, stole her breath. She felt the echo of every almost touch from the night before, the brush of his fingers against her cheek, the nearness of his mouth, the promise of something vast and consuming that had hovered just out of reach. Now it crashed over her like a wave, raw and desperate, tasting of pine smoke and moonlight and the sharp salt of unshed tears. Her pulse hammered against his thumb. His grip tightened fractionally, not in anger but in something closer to panic. "Jessica!" he rasped. The word was torn from him, low and ragged, meant only for her. "Don't do this!" She turned her head slowly until their eyes met. Up close, he looked wrecked. The golden irises had bled almost entirely to black, pupils blown wide with emotion he could no longer cage. His jaw worked, muscle ticking. The scar on his cheekbone stood out stark white against flushed skin. For the first time since she had known him, the Alpha King did not look invincible. He looked human, vulnerable. A man staring at the one thing he had believed was already his, watching it slip through his fingers like sand. The sight pierced her. Because beneath her fury, beneath the righteous fire, there was grief. Real, bone-deep grief for the life they might have had if the kingdom had been different, if he had been different, if the laws had not demanded her silence as the price of his love. She let herself feel it. Let the ache bloom full and bright behind her eyes until tears gathered, hot and inevitable. Then she spoke, voice soft, steady, devastating. "I already have." She twisted her wrist. He released her instantly as though burned. The bond gave one final wrenching snap. Pain lanced through them both, mutual, merciless. Jessica staggered half a step. Darius sucked in a harsh breath as if struck in the chest. For a single instant, the entire courtyard seemed to hold still, suspended in shared agony. Then Jessica straightened. She lifted her chin one last time, and she walked through the gateway. Behind her, movement rippled. First one woman, then 2, then a dozen, stepped out of the ranks. They did not shout, they did not cheer. They simply followed. Bare feet on stone, heads rising, shoulders squaring, eyes shining with tears and something brighter, something dangerous, awakening. More joined. A mother pulled her teenage daughter by the hand. An elder woman who had scrubbed palace floors for 40 years dropped her cleaning rag and stepped forward without looking back. Girls who had never spoken above a whisper now walked with chins high. The tide grew. 50 women, 100. Their footsteps built into a quiet, inexorable rhythm. Darius stood frozen at the edge of the circle, chest heaving, gaze locked on Jessica's retreating back. The High Elder's staff struck the marble again. Once, twice, voice cracking with outrage. "Seize them!" he cried. "This is treason against the sacred order!" Guards hesitated. Some looked to Darius. He did not move. His eyes never left her. Jessica reached the gateway and paused, just for a heartbeat. She turned her head slightly, enough that moonlight caught the single tear tracking down her cheek. She met his stare across the widening distance. No words, only the silent, shattering truth between them. This is what you chose when you chose the law over us. Then she stepped through the arch. The women followed, wave after wave, pouring out into the moonlit streets like water breaking free of stone. Behind them, the courtyard erupted. Shouts, confusion, the clatter of armor as guards finally moved. But Jessica did not run. She walked. And with every step, the frayed ends of the broken bond fluttered behind her like torn silk. Painful, yes, but lighter. lighter than chains, lighter than silence, and somewhere deep inside her chest, beneath the grief and the ache and the fear of what came next, a small, fierce ember glowed brighter. She had spoken. They had followed. The old order had just heard the first crack. Chapter 4. The River Awakens. The streets of the lower quarters had never felt so alive. Moonlight spilled down narrow alleys like spilled milk, turning cobblestones silver and painting every face in soft, ghostly light. Jessica walked at the front, not leading in the way an army marches, but simply moving forward, one foot after the other, trusting that the women behind her would keep pace. And they did. The sound of their footsteps built slowly, soft at first, hesitant taps of bare soles against stone, then steadier, then something almost like a heartbeat. 100 women, maybe more. Mothers with sleeping children bundled against their chests, grandmothers leaning on daughters for support, young girls clutching the hands of sisters they had never been allowed to protect. No one spoke above a whisper. No one needed to. The rhythm said everything. Jessica's chest still burned where the bond had torn. Each breath pulled at the raw edges, reminding her of what she had severed. The pain came in waves, sharp enough to make her vision blur, then dull enough to let her keep walking. She welcomed it. Let it remind her why she had chosen this path. Let it keep her awake, alert, alive. They reached the old fountain square just as the first gray light of false dawn touched the rooftops. The fountain had run dry decades ago. Now it stood cracked and silent, a stone basin full of dead leaves and forgotten wishes. Jessica stopped beside it. The women fanned out behind her in a loose half-circle, breathing hard, eyes wide with the strange mixture of terror and exhilaration that comes when you finally step off the edge of everything you've ever known. She turned to face them. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then an older woman, gray braids wrapped in faded cloth, hands rough from years of scrubbing, stepped forward. Her name was Mara. Everyone knew Mara. She had once sung lullabies to half the children in the quarter before the overseers forbade it. Mara's voice trembled, but it carried. "You said it," she whispered, out loud, in front of them all. Jessica swallowed. Her throat felt scraped raw. "I did." Another woman, younger, barely 20, with a fresh bruise blooming along her jaw, let out a shaky laugh that sounded half-sob. "I thought my heart would stop when you said those words. I thought the sky would fall." Several heads nodded. Tears tracked silently down cheeks. Jessica looked from face to face. She saw fear. She saw hope. She saw the same fragile, furious light that had been burning inside her since that night under the oil lamp with her mother. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted quietly. The honesty felt like peeling off armor. "I don't know if they'll come for us at dawn. I don't know if the elders will declare us outlaws. I don't even know if we can win." A ripple of unease moved through the group. "But I know this," Jessica continued, voice gaining strength. "We are not going back to carrying their water in silence. We are not going back to bowing while they feast. We are not going back to pretending our voices are too soft for the world they built on our backs." Mara reached out and took Jessica's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Then we stay together," she said simply. One by one, others stepped closer. Hands found hands. Shoulders brushed shoulders. A teenage girl, eyes huge and shining, slipped her fingers into Jessica's free hand. The circle tightened. In that moment, under the dying moonlight, something shifted. It wasn't victory. Not yet. It was recognition. The kind that settles deep in your bones when you realize you are not alone in your rage, in your grief, in your refusal to bend anymore. Jessica felt tears rise again, different this time. Not from pain. From the overwhelming relief of being seen, truly seen, by women who had carried the same invisible weight her whole life. She squeezed the hands holding hers. "We hide tonight," she said. "We rest where we can. We speak in whispers. But tomorrow we speak louder." Murmurs of agreement rose like wind through dry grass. They began to disperse in small groups, slipping into shadowed doorways, climbing rickety ladders to attic rooms, melting into the maze of alleys only they knew. No one panicked. No one ran. They moved with quiet purpose, the way people do when they have finally chosen something worth protecting. Jessica stayed by the fountain until the last woman disappeared. Only then did she allow herself to lean against the cracked stone basin. Her legs shook. Her breath came in shallow bursts. The broken bond throbbed like a fresh wound, sending pulses of longing and loss through her veins. She pressed a palm to her chest as though she could hold the pieces together. For one terrible heartbeat, she let herself imagine the other path, stepping forward instead of away, placing her hand in his, feeling the bond flare complete and bright, standing beside him as Luna, being wanted, cherished, safe. The vision was so vivid it stole her breath. Then she opened her eyes. The square was empty. Dawn was coming, gray and merciless. She straightened. No, she had chosen truth over comfort, freedom over chains, herself over a crown she would have worn in silence. And she would choose it again, tomorrow. Every tomorrow. Somewhere in the palace, she knew Darius was pacing stone corridors. She could almost see him, fists clenched, eyes burning, the echo of her final words ringing in his ears. She wondered if he felt the same hollow ache she did. She hoped he did. Because only when something breaks can light finally get in. Jessica turned her face toward the coming dawn. A small, fierce smile touched her lips. Sad, yes, but unbroken. The river had awakened, and it would not be silenced again. Chapter 5. Chains and Fire. Dawn arrived cold and merciless, gray light seeping between rooftops like spilled ink. Jessica had found shelter in an abandoned weaver's loft at the edge of the quarter. Low ceiling, dust thick on the beams, a single narrow window overlooking the back alley. Mara and 3 others shared the space. Lyra, the young woman with the bruised jaw, old Tavia, who had carried water jars longer than most had been alive, and quiet little Celine, barely 14, who had slipped away from her father's house in the night. They spoke in murmurs, rationing words the way they rationed the small heel of bread Mara had brought. Plans formed in fragments. Meet at the dry fountain at midday. Spread word through trusted daughters. Never travel alone. Every sound from the street made them freeze. Cartwheels, boots, the distant bark of a guard's order. Jessica sat against the wall, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them. The broken bond had settled into a dull, constant throb, like a bruise pressed too often. She welcomed the ache. It kept her sharp. It kept her from softening into regret. Mid-morning brought the first crackdown. They heard it before they saw it. The heavy tramp of armored boots echoing up the main lane, shouts cutting through the morning haze. By order of the High Elder, any woman who left the ceremony is to be returned to the palace for questioning. Doors slammed, women screamed, somewhere nearby glass shattered. Jessica was already on her feet. "We move now," she said, voice low, firm. Through the back alleys, no running, running draws eyes. They slipped out the rear window one by one, dropping into the narrow passage behind the building. The air smelled of rotting fruit and wet stone. They moved fast but silent, hugging walls, ducking under low eaves. They almost made it to the next crossing. A patrol rounded the corner, 6 guards in black and gold livery, spears leveled. "Stop!" The command cracked like a whip. Lyra froze. Celine whimpered. Mara stepped in front of the girl without hesitation. Jessica turned slowly. The lead guard, a broad man with a scarred lip, recognized her instantly. His eyes narrowed. "You," he growled. "The one who spoke treason." Jessica lifted her chin. "I spoke truth." He lunged. She dodged, barely, his gauntleted hand grazing her arm. Pain flared hot along her skin. She stumbled back into the wall. The others scattered, but 2 guards blocked the alley mouth. Tavia shoved Celine behind a rain barrel. Mara raised her hands, palms out, pleading. The scarred guard seized Jessica by the upper arm and yanked her forward. His grip was iron. Bruises would bloom tomorrow, if there was a tomorrow. "You're coming with us," he snarled. "The king wants you alive." At the word king, something inside Jessica twisted, sharp, involuntary. The ghost of the bond flared once, a flicker of heat and loss so fierce it nearly buckled her knees. She wrenched free with a strength born of fury. "Don't touch me." He laughed, short, ugly, and raised his fist. Before it could fall, a new voice cut through the alley like a blade. "Enough." Darius stepped from the shadows at the far end. The guards snapped to attention, spears lowered. The scarred man released Jessica so fast she almost fell. Darius wore no cloak now, only the black tunic and leather bracers, hair disheveled as though he had not slept. His eyes found hers across the narrow space and locked. The world narrowed again. No crowd this time, no elders, no ceremony, just stone walls, 6 guards, 4 frightened women, and the 2 of them standing at opposite ends of a filthy alley. He walked forward, slow, deliberate. Each step echoed. The guards parted. When he reached her, he stopped close, too close. She could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the tight line of his mouth, the way his hands flexed at his sides as though fighting not to reach for her again. "Jessica," he said, quiet, rough. The word carried more weight than any command he had ever given. She met his gaze unflinching, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "You sent them to drag us back," she said, not a question. "I sent them to find you." His voice dropped lower. "Before the elders do worse." A bitter laugh escaped her, small, broken. "Worse than chains? Worse than silence?" His jaw clenched. "I could have let them kill you on sight. The law allows it." "Then why didn't you?" For a heartbeat, he said nothing, only stared at her, eyes burning with something she could not name, anger, grief, a longing so deep it looked like pain. "Because I cannot watch you die," he said finally. The admission sounded torn from him, not even now. Jessica felt the words land like stones in her chest, heavy, unwelcome, true. She stepped closer, deliberate, defiant, until only inches separated them. "Then let us go," she whispered. "All of us. Walk away. Pretend you never saw us." His gaze searched hers, desperate, furious, torn. "I cannot." The 2 words shattered something fragile between them. She nodded once, slow, final. "Then do what you came to do." He reached out, slowly this time, and cupped her elbow. Not to restrain, to steady. His touch was warm through the thin sleeve. She hated how her body still remembered it, hated how part of her still ached toward it. "Take her to the lower cells," he told the guards without looking away from her face, voice flat, commanding. "No harm, no chains, food, water. She is not to be touched." The scarred guard hesitated. "My lord." "Now." They moved. Jessica did not struggle as they led her away. She kept her eyes on Darius until the bend in the alley hid him. Behind her, Mara cried out once, sharp, anguished, before a guard's hand clamped over her mouth. Jessica's hands curled into fists. The cells were beneath the palace, damp stone, iron bars, the faint drip of water somewhere in the dark. They placed her in a small chamber alone, straw pallet, single torch flickering outside the bars. No shackles, just the door locked and the echo of boots retreating. She sank to the floor. The bond's absence roared louder here, hollow, endless. Tears came without warning, hot and silent. She let them fall. Let the grief have its moment. But beneath it, fury rose again, slow, steady, unquenchable. She pressed her forehead to her knees. They had taken her body for now. They would never take her fire. Somewhere above, in the palace halls. She knew Darius was pacing, alone, sleepless, haunted by the woman he could not keep and could not release. Good. Let him feel it. Let him understand what it costs to choose law over love. Because the river had not stopped flowing. It had only gone underground. And when it broke free again, it would sweep everything before it. Chapter 6. Whispers in the Squares. The lower cells smelled of wet stone and old iron. Jessica sat on the thin straw pallet, back against the rough wall, knees drawn to her chest. The single torch outside the bars flickered, throwing jagged shadows across her face. Hours had passed since the guards had marched her down the winding stairwell, hours that felt like years. No food had come yet, no water, only silence, thick and watchful. She did not cry again. The tears from earlier had dried into salt tracks on her cheeks. Now only the quiet burn remained, the hollow place where the bond used to live, the slow ache of knowing she had been taken while her sisters were still scattered in the alleys. She pictured them, Mara hiding Celine in some forgotten cellar, Lyra slipping from shadow to shadow with her bruised jaw set in determination, Tavia whispering warnings to anyone who would listen. They were out there, and she was here. The thought should have crushed her. Instead, it sharpened something inside her chest until it felt like a blade. She closed her eyes and listened. Far above, the palace hummed with muffled life, distant footsteps, the low murmur of voices, the occasional clang of armor. Somewhere up there, Darius walked corridors he had once ruled without question. She wondered if he slept, if he ate, if he stood at high windows staring down at the darkened quarter, searching the rooftops for a glimpse of blue silk or a flash of defiant eyes. She hoped the silence tormented him as much as it did her. Footsteps approached, slow, measured. A guard appeared outside the bars, not the scarred one. This man was younger, leaner, with nervous eyes that darted left and right before settling on her. He crouched, voice barely audible. "They're saying you started a fire that won't go out." Jessica lifted her head. "Did I?" He swallowed. Women are gathering again, in the small squares, whispering, passing messages in baskets of laundry, under market stalls. They're saying your name like it's a prayer. Her heart gave a painful lurch. "Not a prayer," she corrected softly, "a promise." The guard glanced over his shoulder, then leaned closer. "They're planning something. Midday tomorrow, the Dry Fountain Square. They want to speak, out loud, all of them." Jessica's breath caught. The guard hesitated, then added in a rush, "I have a sister. She was at the ceremony. She followed you out. She hasn't come home since." He slid a small cloth-wrapped bundle through the bars. Bread, a strip of dried meat, a stoppered flask of water. His hand shook. "Eat," he said. "You'll need strength." Jessica stared at the offering, then at him. "What's your name?" "Riven." She nodded once. "Thank you, Riven." He stood quickly, as though afraid he had already said too much. Before he turned to leave, he whispered one last thing. "They're calling it the river awakening, because nothing stops a river once it starts moving." Then he was gone. Jessica unwrapped the bread slowly. The first bite tasted like dust and hope in equal measure. She chewed carefully, letting the small act ground her. Midday tomorrow. They were still moving, still whispering, still refusing to disappear. She pressed her palm to the cold stone floor and felt something fierce rise in her throat. Not grief this time, but a wild, trembling pride. They had not waited for her to lead them. They were leading themselves, and that knowledge burned brighter than any torch. She leaned her head back against the wall and let a single, quiet laugh escape. Small, cracked, but real. Up in the palace, Darius stood alone in the high solar. The room overlooked the entire lower quarter. Rooftops, narrow streets, the faint gleam of the Dry Fountain Square far below. Moonlight had given way to pale morning sun, but he had not slept. His eyes were rimmed red, his hands braced on the stone sill until his knuckles whitened. He had not gone to the cells. He could not bear to see her behind bars, not because he regretted the order, but because he feared what he would do if he did. Instead, he had paced, listened to reports, learned that the women had not scattered. They had regrouped. Small gatherings in hidden corners, voices rising in careful cadence, names passed like secrets. Jessica, Mara, Lyra, Celine, Tavia. His beta had urged harsher measures, curfews, house-to-house searches, public floggings to remind them of order. Darius had refused. not out of mercy. Out of something colder, certainty that force would only feed the flame. He stared down at the quarter now, searching the maze of alleys for any sign of blue silk, any flicker of movement that might be her. Nothing. Only the ordinary stir of morning. Vendors setting up stalls, children darting between legs, the distant clatter of water jars being filled. But he knew better. The ordinary was a mask. Beneath it, something was building. He felt it in his own blood, restless, unsettled, as though the missing bond had left a void that echoed with every heartbeat. He pressed a fist to his chest. The ache there was not just loss. It was recognition. She had been right. They were made of the same fire, and he had spent his life trying to bank hers instead of letting it burn beside his own. Now the fire had spread, and he did not know how to stop it, only that stopping it might destroy the one thing he had ever truly wanted. Down in the cell, Jessica finished the last of the bread. She stood, paced the small space, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. The raw edges of the broken bond still throbbed, but the pain had begun to change shape, less a wound, more a scar, something that would always mark her, but no longer bleed. She stopped at the bars, looked out into the dim corridor, and whispered to the empty air, "Keep moving, sisters. Keep whispering. Tomorrow we speak louder." Above, in the solar, Darius closed his eyes. He heard her voice in his mind, clear, unyielding, impossible to silence. And for the first time since the ceremony, he did not fight the sound. He let it settle. Let it burn, because somewhere deep inside, beneath pride and duty and centuries of law, a small, terrified part of him hoped the river would keep rising, hoped it would reach him, hoped it would force him to choose. Chapter 7. The Balcony Speech. Midday arrived sharp and bright. The dry fountain square had never held so many souls at once. They came in ones and twos at first, women slipping from doorways with baskets on hips, shawls drawn low over heads, eyes scanning for guards. Then small groups, mothers with toddlers clinging to skirts, sisters arm in arm, elders leaning on canes carved from old olive wood. By the time the sun stood directly overhead, the square brimmed, 300 women, perhaps 4, no men, no children old enough to be conscripted into palace service, only women, standing shoulder to shoulder in the cracked basin of the fountain and spilling out into the surrounding streets. No banners, no weapons, just bodies pressed close, breathing the same air, hearts beating in ragged unison. Jessica was not among them. She remained in the lower cell, pacing the narrow length of her prison, counting heartbeats until she could no longer stand the waiting. The young guard Riven had returned at dawn with another small bundle, cheese this time, an apple, a folded scrap of parchment. The note was written in Mara's careful hand. "We speak today. Your voice lives in ours. Hold fast." Jessica had pressed the paper to her chest until the ink smudged against her skin. Now, far above in the palace's eastern wing, Darius stood at the edge of a high balcony that overlooked the lower quarter. The stone railing was warm under his palms. He had come alone, no guards, no advisors, no beta urging restraint. Only the wind and the distant hum rising from the streets below. He had heard the reports. He had chosen not to stop them. Below, in the square, Mara climbed onto the dry fountain's central pedestal, the same cracked basin that had once held water for the palace jars. She was not tall, but when she raised her arms, the crowd hushed instantly. Her voice, rough from years of silence, carried farther than anyone expected. "We have carried their water," she began. "We have scrubbed their floors until our hands bled. We have birthed their sons and watched them grow into men who never looked back. We have been told our voices are too soft, too dangerous, too much." A ripple of agreement moved through the women. Low murmurs. Heads nodding, fists slowly uncurling at their sides. Mara's eyes shone with unshed tears. "But yesterday one of us spoke, loud, clear, in front of the moon and every eye that ever judged us. She said we are made of the same fire. And when they tried to bind her in chains of silk and law, she walked away, and we followed." A sound rose then. Not a cheer, not yet. A sigh, deep and collective. The sound of lungs that had been held tight for generations finally releasing. Mara's voice grew stronger. "Jessica is not here today. They took her. locked her away because her truth was too bright to ignore. But listen, she paused. Let the silence stretch until it hummed. Her truth is still here, in every throat that refuses to stay quiet, in every foot that refuses to bow, in every heart that remembers what it feels like to stand tall. A young woman near the front, Lyra, lifted her chin and spoke next. Her bruised jaw had faded to yellow, but her eyes burned. I followed her out of that courtyard, she said. I was afraid. I still am. But fear is not heavier than shame. Not anymore. Another voice joined, then another. Women stepped forward, one after the other, sharing fragments. A daughter who had never been allowed to learn letters, a mother whose son had been taken to serve while she was left to grieve alone, an elder who remembered the last woman flogged for speaking above a whisper. The stories wove together like threads on a loom, painful, yes, but beautiful in their honesty. Tears fell freely now, hands reached for hands, shoulders shook with quiet sobs and fiercer laughter. From the balcony, Darius watched. He could not hear every word, but the cadence reached him, the rise and fall of voices no longer whispering. The sight of them standing in the open square, unchained, unafraid, pierced something deep inside him. His wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin, not in anger but in recognition. This was strength. This was the fire he had tried to contain. This was what he had almost claimed and lost. His hands tightened on the railing until stone dust powdered his palms. He felt the absence of the bond like a missing limb, phantom pain that flared every time he remembered her eyes in the alley, her wrist slipping from his grasp, her final words. Then do what you came to do. He had done it, and now the river was rising. Below, Mara raised her arms again. We do not ask for their permission anymore, she declared. We claim what was always ours. Voice, choice, life. And if they come for us, if they try to silence us again, we will not scatter. We will stand, together. The square answered, not with shouts, but with a single sustained note. Hundreds of women humming the old cradle song their mothers had once sung in secret. The melody rose, soft at first, then fuller, then powerful enough to vibrate in the stones themselves. Darius closed his eyes. The sound wrapped around him, achingly familiar, achingly beautiful. It carried grief for what had been lost, pride for what was awakening, and beneath it all, a quiet, unyielding hope. He opened his eyes. Far below in the cell, Jessica heard it too. The hum drifted down through the high vents, faint but unmistakable. She pressed her forehead to the cold bars and let the sound fill her lungs. They were singing. They were standing. They were no longer waiting for rescue. A tear slipped down her cheek. Not from sorrow this time, but from the overwhelming sweetness of knowing she had not been wrong. The elders would come soon. Proclamations would be read. Bounties posted. Guards dispatched. But the song would not stop, and neither would she. Above, Darius turned from the balcony. His steps were slow, heavy. Each one carried the weight of a choice. He could no longer avoid. The river had reached the palace walls, and it was still rising. Chapter 8. Underground Flames. The hum from the square lingered in the air long after the women dispersed. It drifted down through the palace vents like smoke from a distant fire, soft, persistent, impossible to ignore. Guards shifted uneasily in corridors. Servants paused mid-task. Even the elders in their high chamber fell silent for a moment, fingers tightening on scrolls of ancient law as though the parchment might suddenly ignite. Jessica felt it reach her first. Deep in the lower cells, the sound wrapped around her like warm arms she had not expected. She pressed both palms flat to the cold bars and closed her eyes, letting the faint melody fill every empty space the broken bond had left behind. It was not loud enough to make out words, only the rise and fall of voices braided together, grief and pride and quiet fury all carried on the same breath. They had spoken, out loud, in daylight, without her. The realization settled in her chest like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, heavy, warm, almost painful in its brightness. She had not been the flame after all. She had only been the spark. The fire belonged to them now, hundreds of small, stubborn flames joining into something vast and unquenchable. A sob caught in her throat. Not sorrow, but the overwhelming relief of knowing she could rest for one heartbeat and the river would still flow. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Riven appeared again, face pale, eyes darting. He carried no food this time, only urgency. "They're moving you," he whispered. "Tonight. To the old watchtower cells. The elders say the lower ones are too close to the quarter. Too easy for rescue." Jessica straightened. "Who ordered it?" "The king signed the decree himself." Riven's voice cracked on the last word. But he looked like he hated every line he wrote. She searched the young guard's face, saw the conflict there, loyalty warring with something newer, something awakening. "Riven," she said softly, "if they come for me tonight, will you look the other way?" He swallowed hard, looked down at his boots, then back up. "I already have," he admitted. "There's a side passage, behind the third cell block. It leads to the storm drains under the east wall, narrow, dark, but it opens near the old olive grove. If you can get past the outer grate..." He slipped a small iron key through the bars. It landed in her palm with a faint clink. "Midnight," he said. "The shift changes. The hall will be empty for maybe 10 minutes. Jessica closed her fingers around the key. It felt heavier than iron, weighted with trust she had not asked for, but would never forget. "Why?" she asked. "My sister," he answered simply. "She was singing today. I heard her voice in the square. I've never heard her sing before, not once." Jessica nodded. No more words were needed. Riven turned to leave, then paused. "They're saying the elders want you gone," he added quietly. "Permanently. The king, he hasn't agreed. Yet." The words landed like stones in still water. Jessica felt the old ache flare, sharp, familiar, laced now with something darker. The bitter knowledge that even love could become a cage if it refused to bend. She waited until his footsteps faded. Then she sat on the pallet and turned the key over in her hands, tracing its edges in the dim torchlight. Midnight. She would be ready. Far above, in the dimly lit war room, Darius stood before a long table covered in maps and reports. The elders had come in force, 6 of them, robes stiff with ceremony, voices sharp with accusation. "She is a symbol now," the High Elder said, tapping a gnarled finger on the parchment that bore Jessica's name circled in red ink. "Every day she remains alive, the unrest grows. Remove the symbol, and the fire dies." Darius did not answer immediately. He stared at the map of the lower quarter, narrow streets marked in charcoal, the dry fountain square circled in fresh ink. He could still hear the echo of their song in his skull, low and relentless. "They are not dying," he said finally, voice low, dangerous. "They are waking." The elders exchanged glances. One of them, older, thinner, eyes like chipped flint, leaned forward. "Then you must decide, my lord, the law or her." Darius's hand curled into a fist on the table edge. He had spent the afternoon walking the empty corridors of the eastern wing, pausing at every window that overlooked the quarter. He had watched women return to their homes, not with heads bowed, but with chins lifted. He had seen daughters help mothers carry water jars without flinching at the guards who passed. He had felt the shift in the air itself, thicker, charged, alive. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face in the alley, tear-streaked, defiant, heartbreakingly beautiful in her refusal to break. He had chosen law over her once. The cost had been higher than he had imagined. Now the elders waited for him to choose again. He straightened. "I will speak to her myself," he said. "Tonight, alone." The High Elder's mouth thinned. "That is unwise." "It is necessary." He left the room without another word. The palace halls felt longer than ever as he descended toward the lower cells. Each step echoed with memory, her wrist in his hand, her eyes meeting his without fear, the final snap of the bond that still rang in his ears like a broken bell. He reached her cell, stopped. Through the bars he saw her, Sitting on the pallet, back straight, hands folded in her lap, the small iron key hidden inside one fist. She looked up. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither spoke. The torchlight painted her face in gold and shadow. She looked tired, deep shadows beneath her eyes, lips pressed thin, but unbroken, still fire. Darius gripped the bars until his knuckles whitened. "I heard them sing," he said quietly. "Your sisters." Jessica tilted her head. "They're not mine anymore. They're their own." He nodded once, slow, pained. "The elders want you gone," he said. "Exiled, or worse." She did not flinch. "And you?" she asked. "What do you want?" The question hung between them. Simple, devastating. Darius searched her face as though the answer might be written there. "I want—" His voice cracked. He tried again. "I want the kingdom I was raised to protect, and I want the woman the goddess chose for me. I have spent every hour since the ceremony trying to make those two things fit." "They don't," she said softly. "Not as long as the law demands half its people live in silence." Silence stretched, thick, aching. Then he spoke the words that cost him everything. "I know." Jessica's breath caught. He stepped closer to the bars. "I am losing them both," he said. "The kingdom is slipping through my fingers. And you were already gone the moment you stepped down from that circle." She rose slowly, walked to the bars until only iron separated them. "Then let us go," she whispered, "all of us." His eyes closed briefly, pain etching deeper lines around them. "I don't know if I can." Jessica reached through the bars. Her fingers brushed his. Light, tentative, the first voluntary touch since the bond had shattered. He did not pull away. For one heartbeat, they stood like that. Two people on opposite sides of law and loss, connected by the barest thread of shared grief. Then she withdrew her hand. "Midnight," she said. "Decide before then." She turned back to the pallet. Darius remained, chest rising and falling too fast, eyes fixed on the spot where her fingers had touched his. Above them, the palace slept uneasily. Below, in hidden corners and storm drains, women waited. The river had gone underground, but it was still moving. Faster now, and midnight was coming. Chapter 9. The Breaking Point. Midnight came wrapped in heavy silence. The palace corridors had emptied. Torches burned low, spitting faint sparks that died before they hit the stone floor. Jessica stood at the bars of her cell, the small iron key already in the lock. She had waited until the last echo of the shift change faded, boots retreating, doors clanging shut in distant wings before she turned it. The mechanism gave with a soft, reluctant click. She eased the door open inch by inch, every nerve screaming at the tiny sound. The corridor beyond was empty, shadows thick between flickering sconces. She slipped out barefoot, the cold stone biting her soles, and moved toward the side passage Riven had described, a narrow crack behind the third cell block, half hidden by a rusted iron grate. Her heart hammered so hard, she tasted iron in her mouth. She reached the grate, fingers finding the latch. It lifted with surprising ease. Someone had oiled it recently. Riven's handiwork, she realized, and gratitude flashed through her like a quick, fierce flame. She ducked inside. The passage was tight, shoulders brushing damp walls, ceiling so low she had to crouch. Darkness swallowed her almost immediately. Only the faint scrape of her breathing and the drip of unseen water kept her company. She moved forward by feel, one hand trailing the wall, counting steps the way her mother had once taught her to navigate the quarter's maze in blackout nights. 10 minutes. 15. The air grew colder, damper. Then, a faint current of fresher air. The storm drain. She found the outer grate by touch, heavy iron bars set into the wall, moonlight slicing through in thin silver blades. She pushed. It resisted, then gave with a low groan that made her freeze. Nothing moved outside. She squeezed through, scraping her elbows, tearing the sleeve of her prison shift until she tumbled onto damp grass beneath the east wall. The old olive grove stretched before her, twisted trunks, silver-green leaves whispering in the night wind. She was out. For one wild heartbeat, joy surged through her, bright, dizzying, almost painful. She pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from laughing aloud. Freedom tasted like salt air and pine and the sharp sting of scraped skin. She did not run yet. She crouched in the shadow of the wall, listening. Then she heard it. Boots, multiple sets, coming fast from the grove's edge. They had known, or suspected, or simply refused to let her go. Jessica bolted. Branches whipped her face as she plunged deeper into the grove. Thorns caught at her hem, roots snagged her ankles. She ran blind, lungs burning, the broken bond pulsing in frantic rhythm with her heartbeat, reminding her, even now, of the man who had once held her wrist and begged her not to leave. She burst into a small clearing and stopped short. Darius stood there. Alone. Moonlight poured over him, silver on black tunic, gold in his eyes. No guards, no sword drawn, just him, chest rising and falling as though he had run here too. He did not speak at first. Neither did she. The wind moved between them, carrying the scent of olives and night-blooming jasmine and the faint, unmistakable trace of each other. "You escaped," he said finally, voice rough, quiet, almost reverent. "I had help," she answered. "People who chose differently than you." His jaw tightened. He took one step forward. She did not retreat. "I could call the guards," he said. "One shout and they'd be here in seconds." "Then why haven't you?" He searched her face, eyes tracing every line, every shadow, every tear-streaked mark from the cell. "Because I needed to see you one more time," he admitted, "before the elders force my hand, before I lose you completely." The words landed like a blow. Jessica felt the old grief rise again, hot, choking, laced now with exhaustion so deep it hurt to stand. She had run, she had fought, she had broken a bond that was supposed to be eternal. And still, here he was, beautiful, broken, impossible. "You already lost me," she whispered, "the moment you chose the law over the truth." He flinched as though struck. "I know," he said, "I know." He closed the distance, slow, careful, giving her every chance to step away. She did not. When he reached her, he stopped close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, close enough that she could see the tremor in his hands. "I came to offer you one last chance," he said. "Come back, not as prisoner, not even as Luna, just come back. Let me rewrite what I can. Let me try." Jessica looked up into his eyes. She saw the man beneath the crown, the boy raised on duty, the wolf taught to guard rather than love, the king who had never learned how to bend until everything was already breaking. Tears welled again, hers, his shared in the moonlight. She lifted a hand and touched his cheek, light, trembling. His skin was warm, real. The scar along his cheekbone felt rough under her fingertips. "I can't," she said. The words tore from her. "Because if I come back now, everything we've started dies. The river stops. The voices go quiet again. And I would rather die free than live half alive beside you." A sound escaped him, low, shattered, almost a sob. He leaned his forehead against hers. For one long, agonizing moment, they stood like that. Two hearts beating out of time, two fires burning too close and too far apart. Then she stepped back. "I'm going to my sister's," she said, "and we're going to keep speaking, keep standing, keep rising, until the law catches up or breaks." Darius did not try to stop her. He only watched as she turned, as she walked away through the olive trees, as moonlight swallowed her silhouette. Behind her, he sank to one knee, not in defeat, but in something deeper, surrender to a truth he could no longer deny. The guards would find him there at dawn, alone, head bowed, hands empty. And somewhere in the quarter, Jessica reached the hidden cellar where Mara waited with open arms and tear-streaked cheeks. They embraced. No words, only the shared, trembling knowledge that the breaking point had come. And the river, wild, relentless, unstoppable, was about to flood the palace gates. Chapter 10, Dawn Without Chains. Dawn broke over Valthorn in soft rose and gold, the first gentle light that had ever felt like mercy. The olive grove still carried the scent of night, damp earth, bruised leaves, the faint trace of Jessica's footsteps fading into the quarter. She had run the last stretch to the hidden cellar beneath the old weaver's house, heart slamming against her ribs, every shadow a possible guard. When the trap door lifted and Mara's arms pulled her down into the dim, candlelit space, the embrace felt like coming home after a war. They held each other for long minutes, silent, trembling, breathing the same air laced with wax and dust and shared courage. Around them, the other women gathered. Lyra with her faded bruise now only a memory. Tavia leaning on a walking stick she no longer needed for support but for balance. Celine clutching a small bundle of herbs she had gathered in the dark. Riven's sister among them now, eyes shining with the same fire that had carried them this far. No one asked questions. No one needed to. The cellar hummed with quiet understanding. Above ground, the palace woke to chaos that was no longer contained. Messengers ran corridors. Elders shouted in the high chamber. Guards stood frozen at posts, uncertain whether to draw steel or stand aside. Word had spread faster than any decree. The women were marching again, this time not in whispers, not in hidden squares, but openly, down the main avenue, past the market stalls, toward the palace gates. Hundreds became thousands. They carried no weapons. They carried voices. Mara led them now, flanked by the oldest and the youngest, symbols of every life that had been lived in silence. Their footsteps echoed off stone walls that had never before trembled at the sound of bare feet. The chant began low, then rose, the same cradle song from the square, but now it carried words they had never dared sing aloud. We are the river. We are the flame. We rise. We remain. Inside the palace, Darius stood at the great balcony overlooking the avenue. He had not slept. He had not changed from the tunic he wore in the grove. His hands gripped the railing until the stone groaned. Below him, the tide approached, wave after wave of women, faces lifted, eyes unafraid. He saw mothers holding daughters' hands, grandmothers walking with spines straight for the first time in decades, girls who had never spoken in public now singing with voices clear and strong. And at the very front, Jessica. She walked beside Mara, simple shift torn at the hem, hair loose and wild from the night's escape, but her chin high, her gaze steady. She did not look up at the balcony. She did not need to. She had already seen him in the grove. She had already said goodbye. Darius felt the last threads of the old bond, frayed, faded, but never fully severed, give one final, quiet sigh inside his chest. Not pain this time. Release. He turned from the railing. The High Elder waited in the doorway, face ashen, scrolls clutched like shields. "My lord, the law demands—" "The law," Darius said, voice calm for the first time in weeks, was written by men who feared what they could not control. He walked past the elder without another word. Down the grand staircase, through halls lined with portraits of kings who had ruled by force, past guards who lowered their spears without command. He emerged onto the wide steps before the gates just as the women reached them. The chant faltered for one heartbeat, surprise rippling through the crowd. Then silence. Darius stood alone at the top of the steps. No crown, no cloak, no guards at his back. Only a man looking down at the woman who had once been meant to stand beside him. Jessica met his gaze across the distance. No anger in her eyes now. No grief, only quiet certainty. He descended one step, then another. When he reached the bottom, the crowd parted without force, women stepping aside, watching, waiting. He stopped 3 paces from her. The wind moved between them, carrying the scent of roses from the palace gardens and the salt of coming rain. "I abdicate nothing," he said, voice carrying to every ear, "but I yield what should never have been taken." He turned to the crowd, slow, deliberate. "By my word as Alpha King, the laws of silence end today. Women will speak in council. They will walk the halls without permission. They will choose their paths, their voices, their lives. The jars will be carried by any hand that offers. The feasts will seat any who hunger. The kingdom will no longer stand on half its foundation. A sound rose, not a cheer, not yet. A collective breath, a release so deep it felt like the stones themselves exhaled. He looked back at Jessica. "I cannot give you back what I broke," he said softly. "The bond, the future we might have had. But I can give you this, freedom, for all of you. And if that is all I ever give, let it be enough." Jessica searched his face. She saw the boy beneath the king, the man beneath the crown, the heart that had finally learned to bend instead of break. She stepped forward. Not to him. Not into his arms. She stepped past him, slow, regal, up the first step. Then the second. She turned at the top, facing the crowd. And she spoke, voice clear, carrying like moonlight over water. "We did not come to take the throne. We came to take our place beside it. And from this day, no one kneels unless they choose to. No one is silent unless they wish to be. We are Valthorn, whole, equal, free." The chant returned, louder now, joyful, unstoppable. "We are the river. We are the flame. We rise. We remain." Darius remained at the bottom of the steps. He did not follow her up. He did not need to. He watched her stand there, wind lifting her hair, sunlight kissing her face, and felt the last of the old weight lift from his shoulders. Not love returned, not a mate reclaimed, but respect, deep, hard-won, mutual. Later that evening, under a sky streaked with sunset, Jessica stood alone on the same balcony where Darius had once watched the square. The quarter below glowed with lanterns, women moving freely, laughing openly, children running without fear of curfew. She pressed a hand to her chest. The hollow place was still there, scarred, tender, but no longer bleeding. She smiled, small, sad, radiant. The sadness had been real. The pain had been brutal. The heartbreak of a bond shattered in public would echo in her forever. But the ending was light. She had not knelt. She had not begged. She had risen. And the kingdom had risen with her. Somewhere in the gardens below, Darius walked alone beneath the olive trees. He paused, looked up at the balcony, saw her silhouette against the fading sky. He lifted a hand, not in summons, not in possession, in farewell, in gratitude. She lifted hers in return. No words crossed the distance, only understanding. Then she turned back to the horizon. The moon rose, full, silver, impartial. And for the first time in 300 years, its light fell equally on every face in Valthorn. The river has risen. The chains have shattered. Jessica walked away from a crown so every woman could finally wear her own. And now, it's your turn. If this story lit something inside you, if you felt the ache of silence and the fire of finally speaking, if you ever stayed small so someone else could feel big, then stand with her. Share this story. Tag a woman who needs to remember she is not too soft, too loud, too much. Tell her, you don't have to kneel, you were never meant to. Drop a if Jessica's "I will not be your mate" gave you chills. Drop a if the broken bond hurt in the best way. Drop a if you're ready to rewrite your own rules. Comment below, what would you have said on that ceremonial stone? What chain are you ready to break today? This isn't just a story, it's a spark. Let's set the whole damn forest on fire. You're not just reading anymore, you're rising.